Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
Several years ago, I was hiking with my mom when she calmly stated that she didn't think women should have to ask for what they want. And it was a good thing I was behind her because I do not have a poker face, and she did not see my jaw drop to the ground. I thought, wow, the mind-reading school of relationships, how's that working for you? And I realized that the appeal of this way, I really do. I recognize the appeal of thinking this way, that it goes along with the soulmate fantasy and that if you really loved me, you would know concept. And it lets me off the hook for both identifying and communicating what makes me feel loved and connected in a relationship. How great is that? But a second part of the problem is that you're left guessing about what it is that would make your partner happy, and if you guess wrong, no matter how sincere your effort might have been, you find yourself in hot water. So with the comfort provided by traditional rules now gone, and the ones for modern intimate relationships not really very well established, is there a way to make it work? Well, I got great news for you, because author and founder of CompassionPower, Dr. Stosny, is here with some good news on that question. So, Dr. Stosny, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this natural but very confusing situation of being in long-term intimate relationships.
Yeah, unfortunately, our brains didn't really evolve for that. For one thing,
that's not good news.
The emotional part of our brains was fully developed when the life expectancy was 27, so you didn't have to worry that much about long-term relationships.
Yeah, back then it was just surviving till the next day.
Right, and you didn't have to worry about quality of life. Whenever we're in survival mode, we don't even think of quality.
Right. So you wrote a really interesting article that appeared on Psychology Today's website called What Your Partner Needs to Hear You Say. And the one thing I loved about this is you instructed all of us to repeat out loud 3 times. I don't know what the hell I'm doing when it comes to making a modern intimate relationship work. I love that. And so here's the question. Why do we need to not just hear this, but actually say it out loud repetitively?
Well, it's because ego gets in the way of really learning how to make a relationship work, because like your mother, we think we should know. But actually, there's no way we could know. The historical models have broken down. Gender roles have broken down. The biggest factors are the death of the extended family, which is about 70 years ago now. When I was a kid even, I'm not quite that old, but when I was a kid, you would rarely have a nuclear family that's 2 parents and children living alone together. You would always have Grandma up in the attic, Aunt Sally down in the basement, and Uncle Fred in the guest room.
Now, wait a minute, are you Southern?
No, I was in New Jersey. That's the way it was. And if they weren't in the
crazy ants in the attic down here.
Well, we have them in New Jersey too.
Well, I mean, and that's really true. We are terribly, terribly isolated. Plus, you know, as I tell people, we're now on 2nd and 3rd generation divorces. So sometimes there isn't even an intact nuclear family.
Yes, that's right. And you see, the rise in family violence directly parallels the decline of the extended family. It's almost a pure inverse relationship because they, protected you from child abuse because your kid wore you out. You sent him upstairs to irritate Grandma for a while when she couldn't take it anymore.
Right.
And Sally would take over. And you didn't have as much domestic violence with the brother-in-law living next door.
Interesting. Well, yeah, because people would know. There wasn't, yes,
right.
There might still be some quiet behind closed doors. And I think that's also part of the problem now, because we also have social media where everybody puts their best face forward on social media, which really distorts this whole thing even more, because those people over there aren't having any difficulties. Really?
Well, if they're on social media all the time, they're probably not noticing each other.
Well, yeah, which again can be problematic. So other than the breakdown of the extended family, what are some of the
also marrying for love is only 200 years old, and marriage was not designed for love. It was a social political alliance, and you would start at a very low level of interest, trust, compassion, and love, and there's nowhere to go but up. We start at a very high level of love, compassion, interest, an unsustainable level, really, and there's nowhere to go but down. So nature and history doesn't prepare you for modern intimate relationships, so you've got to learn how to do it, and it's going to look a little different with each couple. Because the emotional demands on couples are so much greater now, and they're idiosyncratic for a lot of people. In other words, the emotional meaning that you give to the same events and behaviors are not the same that your husband will give, because he has an opposite vulnerability, a different temperament. We seek those things out in our partners. A different family history. I assume he's not your brother.
And what's even the oddest thing is, even if you come from the same family, you don't have the same family history, because you experience things different from your siblings.
That's true, and your parents mature as they get older. So there's an old saying in family therapy: no siblings have the same parents.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, and I've noticed when I work with my couples that is one of the. In fact, I've actually kind of termed it like the biggest challenge is, this person over here doesn't think like me, experience life like me, behave like me. Now, what the heck am I supposed to do with him?
Well, allow it to enrich your life, because we really do seek out the differences. There's no me harmony. You don't want someone just like you. You might as well live by yourself.
Right.
We want those differences, and I think the secret of modern relationships is cherish as many differences as you can, appreciate as many as you can, and tolerate the ones you can't cherish or appreciate.
I love that. So you mention in this article that the best approach to a successful relationship is for each partner to say to the other, teach me how to love you, and I will teach you how to love me. And so this is a really interesting concept, because we don't experience love in the same way. The things that matter to us, may not be the same thing. We might have some agreement, yes, like we want to have children and or raise them in this particular way, but we can go way off track on that one too. So you break this down into a formula, and I'd like to kind of take us through that formula. So I'd like to talk about the first two steps, and what are the first two steps in this formula of teaching each other how to love each other?
Okay, well, let me give you a little background first.
Okay.
See, people don't really know. You don't think about what will make you feel loved, and the reason we think about what doesn't make us feel loved, but not really what does. And the reason for that is it's not really being loved that feels so good. It's being loving. And that's kind of hard to see sometimes, because it's so much easier to be loving if you are loved. Yes. But it's being loving that makes all the difference, because it doesn't feel good to be loved if you don't feel lovable. You feel like you're getting something you don't deserve or something you can't return. So it's really being loving, and that was the background. I wanted people to think about what's going to make you feel loved. And and also it's the I developed the Power Love formula about 30 years ago, which is based on if you want to love big, you have to think small. It's really very small moments, frequent small moments of connection. Since then, Barbara Fredrickson has written a couple of books. She's a researcher. She's not a therapist. She called the one I like the best is called Micro Moments of Love.
Oh, what a great title!
Yeah, where her data shows that it's very small moments of connection, like a brief eye contact, you pass by each other and just reach out and touch. Nothing big, but it creates this attitude of connection. And that not only makes people happier in their relationships, but they're physically healthier, according to her data. So that's what I was going after, these small moments of connection.
Well, and that makes sense. Yeah.
And think about what they are. So you start out by, like I would, if you're my wife, I will ask you, what can I do that would make you feel loved? And what would you say, just off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head would be, if we want to talk love languages, I'm an acts of service kind of person. So if you actually did something for me, so one of the things that makes me feel loved is when it's my night to do the dishes and I come in to clean up the kitchen and my husband's already done it, and it's like, oh my gosh, I feel so loved.
Okay, and I could do that if I'm your husband. I could do the dishes now and then when it's your turn, not every night, but. But now and then.
Feel loved because then he'd feel taken advantage of. But yeah.
Right. Of course, but the second part of it is, so you want to make it easier for people to do what you want. We tend to be resentful, and that makes it hard for people to do what we want. We want to make it easy. So I say, I can do that. I can wash the dishes, but you know what will make it easier for me to do that? If you would appreciate it when I do.
Oh, yeah.
And you could do that, right? So you are doing something to help me make you feel loved, and I am doing something to make you feel loved. It's reciprocitous. And that's really what, you got to feel loving in order to, you got to be loving in order to feel loved. That's really what that's about.
And that can be a problem because you mentioned the R word, the resentment, and when I work with couples, it's like, well, you do this because, and it's like, well, but then when's my partner going to do this? I said, no, it doesn't work that way. It's like somebody's got to step up and start the loving cycle.
Yeah, I have every marriage therapist has gotten that. Why should I be the one to have to do this? Why should I? The answer always has to be because you want a better life.
Right.
and you got to answer that yourself. Why do I have to? I said do it myself now and then. Why do I have to do all this work for clients? Well, because I want to be a better person.
Right, and that's partially why we're together, and it's really interesting because I was working with a couple last night, and he, there have been some problems, and he kind of dug down into it, and he goes, well, I'm just selfish. I said, yeah, but you can't be selfish and happily married.
Actually, what I say to people who say that, if you really are selfish, you will be happily married, because if you're really selfish, you're going to value the most important person in your life. And that will create happiness. It's self-destructive to devalue someone you value.
Right.
So true selfishness will lead to a happy marriage, but what somebody says they're selfish means is they don't want to think about their partners, and they don't see how self-destructive that is.
Right, they get caught into this. Because early on, when we're in relationships, we're always thinking about, what can I do to make my partner feel good and feel wonderful and feel special? And then somewhere along the line, it shifts to, what have you done for me lately? And to me, that's that deadly shift, because obviously, what you were talking about earlier about those micro moments, somehow they've stopped.
Well, I think it's because we do marry on such a high level of interest and love, and it has to come down because it consumes too much resources, too much mental resources, too much interest. We've got to function in society besides being in love. And if it goes down equally, it's not so bad because you stay connected and invest energy in other places, work and children, that kind of thing. But it tends not to go down equally. One goes down in interest and attention faster than the other.
Right, and then, of course, you introduce those lovely little beings called children, and that kind of sucks people's attention, too.
Yeah, well, statistically, marital satisfaction goes down with each child because of that diminishing attention from the couple. But they have to be able to stay connected while they're doing it. Connection's mostly an attitude. Yeah. And that you choose to feel connected and you choose to feel disconnected. What I try to get people to see is that you like yourself a lot better when you choose to feel connected. And you like yourself less when you choose to feel disconnected.
And your life goes a lot easier, too, especially if you're in a relationship.
Yeah, well, your life's going to go better when you like yourself better.
Yeah. So this is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking with Dr. Stephen Stosny. He's the author and founder of CompassionPower, about how to make romantic relationships work when all the old rules seem to have gone out the window. So if you're finding this to be a challenge for you, I invite you to contact me today. Give me a call or send me an email and take advantage of my free, no-obligation, Create Your Happily Ever After strategy session. You can reach me at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. Or you can send me an email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS. Coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. Now, I want to get back to talking with Dr. Stosny and his formula. So what are the next steps in your formula for teaching each other how to love?
Well, then you make a list of what your partner can do for you to make you feel loved. And again, these are small moments of connection. And I'll tell you what I came up with for my wife. When I come home, I would like her to stop whatever she's doing and come and give me a hug, come and greet me. Because she works from home, and she can be distracted when I'm coming in. And that's not a tradition in her family. So, and she said, okay, I can do that. And I said, well, how can I make it easier for you to do that? And she says, well, when I hug you, really hold the hug. Usually you rush right by me to go to the bathroom. A middle-aged man with a prostate, I'm sure I did do that. So what I started doing was, if it was a long drive, I would stop in a public bathroom before I got home so I could really enjoy that hug.
Well, and I love the concept of this because you're creating this together. It isn't one person saying, do this, do this, do this. It's, okay, so here's my list, and now I'm going to ask you how could I make that easier for you to do? I mean, so it's like in my family, I do the grocery shopping. Always done the grocery shopping because I have this weird thing about picking my own fruits and vegetables, and But what would help me do it is when my husband and I talk about, well, what meals do we want? What do you need from the grocery store? Don't put it on the list. I mean, something that will help me do that. And then, of course, he always, he thanks me every week for going to the grocery store, which makes it feel like not a chore, even though it is a chore. Yeah. So I love that concept of doing that. And do you find when you're working with your couples that, because you were talking about earlier, that sometimes we don't know what makes us feel loved, we know what makes us feel unloved? How can couples identify these smaller things as opposed to, well, you would just listen to me or you'd pay attention to me? And when I work with my clients, I say, okay, give me something that if I were sitting in your kitchen with a clipboard, I could check off, yes, that's happening. What exactly would I be seeing? Make it more concrete.
Well, if that's it, I want you to listen to me more, then I would say, or the partner would say, well, it would make it easier for me to listen to you more if you would use shorter sentences. Because usually the person who's not listening feels the other person is broadcasting, not really.
Oh, yes, and now you just headed straight into some gender differences.
Yeah, sometimes, but it's not just that the cliche of women talking more. I think women, when they talk, try to I actually studied transcripts of same sets. Men talking to men and women talking to women years ago when I was in graduate school. Women talk to convey experience. You want to convey the experience of whatever you're talking about, where men tend to talk about facts.
Right,
so when you're trying to talk about experience, he's listening to facts. So just throw a few facts in now and then, along with the experience. You don't see that difference anymore now that people have GPS, but you used to really see it when the difference between men and women giving directions.
Yes.
A man would say, you go down to that street, turn left, and turn right, and then you're there. A woman will say, you go down to where that big oak tree hangs over the street, and then the purple flowers are on the left. Then you go down by the row of stores. She's conveying the experience of the drive.
Right. Yeah, my daughter doesn't know a single street name. It's like, okay, honey, you got to help me out here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big difference. And what I train myself to do in my own marriage, and what I train men to do, is be flattered that your wife wants to share this experience with you. And when they hear that, well, sharing experience, it's not just talking at me, then they get a little more open to it. But you do have to, we got to come out of our comfort zones a little. A man has to listen to slightly longer sentences than he would like to, and the woman has to use slightly shorter sentences than she would like to.
But that's this dynamic of helping each other. Right. With what you want and need, and then moving it in, so you're creating this interaction, this reciprocity that you talked about, okay, I'm willing to shorten my sentences if you can handle a little bit longer. So we both get what we need out of that, and it makes us feel more connected.
Right. You meet in the middle, and that's really what I think connection is, because you're not going to make your partner into you, and you don't really want to.
Although people do try this. They do think that's what they want. It's like, no, really, you don't.
My favorite metaphor for a relationship now is an instrumental duet. Both musicians can make beautiful music on their own, but together they make something better than they can on their own, harmony. But they can't do that if the violin's trying to make the cello into a violin, or the cello is trying to make the violin into a cello. It won't work. You just make noise. So you've got to accommodate each other's differences. The biggest mistake, and that was background of developing this formula, the biggest mistake I think we make is giving our partners, or assuming that our partners are experiencing the world in exactly the same way we are, because that's almost never true.
Well, and that comes out with when couples are relating maybe a conversation that they had, and one person will say, well, you said this, and it's like, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. It's like, okay, if you don't have some recording device, you're never going to agree, because they actually experience that conversation differently.
Differently, absolutely.
But they're arguing about it. It's like I said, because I tell people, what your partner says is not what you hear, and what you say is not what they hear, and as long as everybody can understand that, then we're okay. Yeah. So you also point out that learning, that mastering this formula takes time and consistency, and you suggest it takes about 6 weeks, which actually in the long run is a blip. I mean, 6 weeks in a marriage is nothing. So what is the commitment that each partner should make about the relationship and their behavior during this 6-week time period when they're working on, okay, I've got your list, you've got my list, I've told you how, what would help me give you, make you feel loved, and you've told me, what would help you make me feel loved. So
The reason it takes 6 weeks is because most interactions in a couple who lives, or anybody who lives together, become habituated. Mm-hmm. Upwards of 60% of all your interactions are habits, meaning that you respond the same way on the same physical conditions, morning, afternoon, hungry, tired, over and over again. So, and your brain wants to do habits because they consume just a fraction of the mental energy that intentional behavior does. So you're going to keep slipping back into habits unless you make a real effort in the 6 weeks to keep your list in mind, be mindful of it. Now, after about 6 weeks, that'll become your new habit. Then you won't have to really think about it anymore. The bad news is it takes 6 weeks. The good news is that's all it takes.
That's all it takes. So what have you found? I mean, there's some standard things about, why should I have to do this? It's like, okay, what's your goal? What is it that you want to have happen?
Well, you've got to break I call it the toddler brain standoff. The toddler brain standoff, if you loved me, you would do this. Or like your mother said, if he loved me, he would know what I want. Yeah. And the problem with that logically is the partner would say, if you loved me, you wouldn't ask me to do that. And that's why it doesn't get you anywhere. It's not really about love. It's about differences in perspective. So what you want to do is make it safe to love each other from different perspectives, not try to make it one perspective. Binocular vision is what I emphasize, being able to see both perspectives at the same time. If you can't really see your partner's perspective about any interaction or your relationship as a whole, don't make a judgment about it, because even if yours is absolutely right, and it never is absolutely right.
It may be right for you.
Yeah, but even if it was factually right, it's incomplete without your partners. So,
yeah, I mean, and I see how that could play out, because there's a lot of times when, and my husband said this to me once, because I really don't like it when he has very cold hands or feet and he puts them on me. I mean, I do not like being cold. And so one day I put my cold hands on him, and he goes, if I did that to you, it would really annoy you. I said, yeah, but I know it doesn't bother you, so it's actually okay. But, it's one of those things where, he knew what was important to me. I knew he didn't care, and I wanted to have my hands warmed up. So, but we didn't get into this argument, and I think people do, about, well, why is that important to you? Why does that justify why you need that? And I think that's
because what you have to justify it because it's not important to me. See, that's the subtext, and that's what gets you into trouble. It's got to be us, not my perspective, not your perspective, but that joint perspective. There's really three entities in the relationship. There's you, there's your partner, and there's the relationship. And the relationship's like a fruit orchard. You've got to nurture it, and it'll feed you. A lot of times I think I'm doing things not for my wife, because then I'll expect her to do something for me in return, and we'll start keeping score. I do it for a relationship, because the relationship nurtures me, and it's a better relationship if I put some effort into it.
Right, and I really love that perspective, because that's what I talk about too, is that you don't stop being an individual, you're just you plus. It's you plus the relationship, and you're wanting that relationship to be as strong and healthy as possible, which means you can't do things that are harmful to you in it, but that means that maybe you do things that you wouldn't normally do, but because it enhances the relationship.
Well, my example is going to the ballet. That's not really harmful to me, but I do it because it's good for my relationship.
Right. So I always love talking about this and giving people some really concrete and practical things that they can do. And this, and making these lists, and getting really specific about, it really makes me feel loved when this happens, and here's what you can do, and I really think that gives people more of a sense of safety and security, because I don't have to try to mind read.
Right. Also, I will ask couples, especially if if I'm not seeing them as a couple, if I'm seeing them one at a time, start this conversation by saying what your partner already does to make you feel loved, especially if you're doing it with a man, because men always hear the way you love isn't good enough. Right, yeah, there's criticism. They hear criticism. Even no matter how she puts it, no matter how many I statements she uses and feeling statements she uses, that's what he's going to hear, because men have this dread of failure. And men don't like to do anything they can't do well. Right, which sometimes I think women don't understand, and it is important to let. I think it's important for both genders to let people know, wow, I so appreciate this. I mean, I've never met a man who didn't want his wife to be happy. So if you tell him how to make you happy, especially if you can do it without spending a lot of money. And I so want, that is so true. And this is, I think a lot of women don't understand that all men really want to do is make the women in their lives happy. Because if you're not happy, they're not going to be happy. They're going to feel like a failure if you're not happy. Right. I've had men married to depressed women. They can't bear to look at them because the pain in her face is so painful for them to look at. Right. I actually have to hold their heads and make them look at their wives with tears in their eyes so they can be sympathetic. Right. But the shame of failing as a partner paralyzes them, and they can't look unless I force them to. Once they do it, then they can be sympathetic. Yeah, but because they personalize that, and she's not depressed because of you, but yeah, it's very, very hard, and it's the same reason why men don't like it when women cry. It's like, okay. So this has been a really wonderful conversation. I thank you so much for participating in this and sharing this information. And can you let people know where they can find this article, where they can find more of your writings? Because you've written a lot of things, and like I said, earlier I said I've been to some of your seminars and I've read some of your books, and I think it's wonderful advice. Can you tell people how to find you? What we talked about today is summarized in my latest book called Empowered Love. A lot of it is also on my blog on psychologytoday.com, and our website is CompassionPower.com. Okay, so terrific. So, there's another marriage relationship expert that I know Dr. Stosny knows named Terry Real, and he wrote in his The New Rules of Marriage this statement that each partner should make: how can I help you give me what I need? Which is a somewhat similar thing that we've been talking about, which means we have to know what we want, what we need, what makes us feel loved. We have to know what that is, because expecting your partner to just know, or worse, actually setting them up for failure by testing them, is the path to dissatisfaction. So you have to know what you want and be willing to both communicate it and help your partner in giving it to you. And so the approach that you've heard about today is really a good place to start. And I hope you'll keep listening to the show for more good advice. And until next week, stay loving.